One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today we are super excited to have on the show Dan O'Connell. Dan is the Chief Revenue Officer and the Chief Strategy Officer at Dialpad. Dialpad is doing some really interesting things around helping people manage their telephony and making sure that people can use the phone across big customer support teams and big customer service teams, sales teams, etc. So they're doing really cool things. It's a Series D company. I think over 100 million in ARR, and Dan has a lot of really interesting insights to share. He was also an early employee at Google, where he led the inside sales organization at AdWords. He worked directly with Sheryl Sandberg. After that, he joined AdRoll as VP of Sales, and he was also CEO and president of TalkIQ, and then he led that company through its acquisition by Dialpad. So a lot of really interesting insights, some of them about just transitioning and integrating through an M&A process, through an acquisition process, which I think is always interesting for all of us to hear about, since it's so much of what sometimes we're focused on in the high growth universe. Now, before we do that, we want to thank our sponsors. We've got two sponsors on the show today. One of them's brand new. It's a company that everybody's heard about. It's called DocuSign. Every sales org feels the pressure to close deals faster. Take control with the DocuSign Agreement Cloud, a suite of tools that automate sales contracts and quotes all right in your CRM. Create custom contracts in a click, sign them digitally, and automatically pull data back into your opportunities. See why more than 500,000 businesses use DocuSign with a free trial and discount exclusively for Sales Hacker listeners at go.docusign.com/saleshacker. Our second sponsor is, of course, Outreach, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach supports sales reps by enabling them to humanize their communications at scale, from automating the soul-sucking manual work that eats up selling time to providing action-oriented tips on what communications are working best. Outreach has your back. Now, without further ado, let's listen to Dan O'Connell from Dialpad. Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome back to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today we are excited to have Dan O'Connell on the show. Dan is the Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Revenue Officer of Dialpad, and we're going to talk all about what Dialpad is and does. He spent his early career building the Google AdWords inside sales organization under a woman named Sheryl Sandberg, who some of us may have heard of. After Google, he joined AdRoll as a VP of Sales, scaling a 150-person global sales and support organization. And this early experience in sales highlighted the critical need for businesses to understand their sales and support conversations in real time, which became the catalyst for joining the team at TalkIQ as CEO and president. In May, Dan spearheaded the acquisition of TalkIQ by Dialpad, joining the team as a board member and serving as the Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Revenue Officer, overseeing the entire sales team. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. That was the most extensive background that I've ever been privileged to have. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's my absolute pleasure. So Dan, your title is Chief Strategy Officer, Chief Revenue Officer. Tell us, what is Dialpad? What do you all do?
Yeah, so Dialpad's a business communications platform, and then they acquired the business I was running a year and a half ago called TalkIQ that was founded by Etienne Main-Rashid and Jim Palmer, and it's a real-time speech analytics and NLP company, which is a fancy way of saying we can capture conversations and help people understand them, and that makes a lot of sense to have at a telephony company, so we kind of group those together. And we have 3 different products. We do cloud telephony, we have a call center product, and we have a sales-specific dialer as well.
Awesome. Roughly how big is Dialpad from like a rough ARR revenue perspective? Obviously, don't share anything confidential, but roughly how big is the company?
Yeah, so we're growing fast, in close to $100 million in ARR. We got customers in 62 countries, tens of thousands of customers.
Awesome. Fantastic. So Dan, first of all, loved reading that bio about your background, but let's start at the beginning. How'd you get into sales in the first place, and how did you end up working for Sheryl Sandberg for Google?
Yeah, so I went to school at Santa Clara University, which is right in the heart of Silicon Valley, and fell in love with tech very early on in my career. Growing up, I was pretty much doing 2 things. I was either getting yelled at my parents because I was on the computer, or playing sports, because I was playing probably a dozen of them and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. That really led me into, right when I graduated, the first Tech Fest had just happened. And I was actually deciding between joining an unpaid internship at a media company or joining a small startup called Google. And Google was not Google at the time. Google happened to offer me a paycheck, and so I went with the one that was going to pay me versus the one that was not going to pay me. And sure enough, that happened to be one of the best decisions of my career. And as I said, a lot of people kind of look at my background, are like, oh, what made you join Google? And at that time, it was literally they were going to pay me.
Wow. Okay. Well, that has often been cited as their competitive advantage, that they pay their employees. So mazel tov on that. What did they hire you to do at Google?
Yeah, so I had joined. So AdWords had just started, and so AdWords was obviously their advertising business. You can go to Google, you type in keywords, and you can see ads that correspond with the search terms. And so essentially, I was hired to go and sell AdWords and to go support AdWords customers. That AdWords organization at the time was 30 people. Sheryl had just left Washington, D.C. and joined Google. So the team was a really small team of just trying to launch a new product that happened to be pretty revolutionary in the terms of way people utilize the internet to brand and sell things. And so it was pretty interesting to go through that experience of seeing a business be scaled, how to architect it, and also just sell something that's brand new.
What were the key lessons? Walk us through that experience, because it must have been, to your point, both exciting and enervating and challenging and scary all at the same time.
Yeah, I think the key lessons, one is hiring, obviously, and some of this is not necessarily rocket science. And I would say some of the key things are, look, hiring is incredibly important. At the time I was there, and for a number of years, we literally had start classes of probably 50 people a week. And so when you're hiring that many people, even not that many people, say you're just hiring 5 people a week, I think people can start to take a step back from hiring. And at the end of the day, finding the best talent and really vetting people and making sure that those are people that have the necessary skills that you want to go up and work with every day, have the same values, is probably one of the most critical things. Google did an excellent job for a number of years being super scrappy, meaning you don't always need processes, robust processes. You don't always need software. You don't always need people to solve things. And I think a lot of times in other startups that I've joined, that say like, hey, I can't do my job unless I have X, Y, and Z. And I don't think that's the case. You can go and talk with customers or sell things. Literally, you don't need a bunch of tools to go and do that. It's pretty easy to go and have conversations with people.
How do you screen for values appropriately, do you think, especially when you're hiring, when 50 people a week are in onboarding classes?
Yeah, I think one is actually having that conversation, right? So I think a lot of times when I go and chat with people in interviews, one is I actually don't want to sit across from people in an interview. I think it's really awkward. I actually like taking people on walks and actually sharing here's how I like to function and work. And these are the values that are really important to me. One, honesty, trust, transparency, the ability to have hard conversations, being respectful of context and tone. I think you can say anything as long as you think about the context and tone in which you're going to talk to somebody. That makes it right, and that allows somebody to have really difficult, hard conversations. And then people that are going to push themselves. And I think when you're thinking about how do you identify people that push themselves, is looking at what are the things that they do or have accomplished in their lives. Now, not everybody comes from a background with strong economic means. Maybe somebody had to go to a different type of school because they couldn't afford to go to a private school, but they got a full ride at that other school. I think understanding those dynamics gives you a lot of insights in terms of the values. And so that forces you to slow down and understand people's stories as opposed to just their professional experience.
Interesting. What was the sales process like at that point at Google? How did you know who to call? Was it all inbound lead driven? Was it totally inbound and you were just responding to requests? Did you have a prospecting list, particularly when you have a product that, nobody had ever heard of before? How did you get things going?
Yeah. So initially it was inbound, right? And so Google, the nice part of when Google had launched AdWords you were selling against newspaper and TV and billboards. So it's pretty easy to call anybody. Literally everybody was running it. But if you're running business, you have to brand yourself and run an advertisement somewhere. You could literally call any business and say, look, you're spending X, Y, and Z on a newspaper ad, or let me understand what you're spending on a TV or what you're spending on a billboard. And then you just start asking the normal questions, like, what is your return? How many people do you know see that ad? How many people actually can you tie into saying, hey, they saw that billboard and then actually came in and bought something? And the answer back then, and again, this is 15 years ago, the answer is, I have no idea. And then you provide a solution that says, well, would it be valuable if I could tell you not only how many people saw your ad, how many people engaged with it, and then how many people actually bought something. And by the way, if nobody ever clicks on your ad and goes to your website, it doesn't cost you anything. So that brand exposure that you receive on the web is the same as the brand exposure of somebody driving down 101 and seeing your billboard. You just simply don't have to even take that cost. That conversation alone pretty much said, if you then ask, hey, are you interested in learning more? 99.9% of the people said, oh, tell me more. This is really interesting. So then it really came down to how do you optimize for people that have the biggest budgets, right? Who are going to be the biggest spenders? Fortunately, there's ways to go and do that fairly easily in terms of fastest growing companies or fastest startups, or looking at TechCrunch at the time to see who got the most funding, all sorts of those different things.
Were you an account executive? Did they, right out of school, did they put you into a full quota carrying role, or did those definitions not even exist and you're sort of just doing whatever was required?
We didn't even have an inside sales team at the time. So the very first job I had was called AdLeads. And AdLeads was literally responding, much like a BDR, was responding to inbound lead form requests. And so a lot of it was actually just asking questions, say, hey, look, I've heard about AdWords. Tell me about it. How quickly can I get started? And I literally had a speech I could give with my eyes closed in a 5-minute ramble of here's where you go to get where to go to get signed up. If you have questions on how to set your budget, how to see your ads, all of that.
So, amazing. And then how long were you at Google? Tell us a little bit about the progression and then how you made it to AdRoll.
Yeah, so I was there for 9 years. Every time I had an opportunity to join a different team at Google, I took that opportunity. I think those are ways that you can obviously get exposed to new opportunities, but also just progress your career fairly quickly. So having a little bit of risk. So when we were looking to build out an inside sales team, one of the first things I did was I wanted to actually go and do that. I had the product knowledge and kind of the skill set of saying, look, I know this product. I respond to these inbound requests all day. Me doing outbound and talking about it to larger customers doesn't intimidate me. Sounds a lot more fun. And again, there's you're going to get paid more and you have bonus and commissions. When they were looking for team leads for that team, I had expressed kind of all along the way that I wanted to be a manager and get into leadership. And so when those opportunities hopped up, I was constantly one of the first people to kind of raise their hand and do that. And then after 9 years. And I wish I had left Google 5 years faster, looking back, to be honest. I left with my boss to go help scale another ad tech business. And he had said, look, come with me and you can run all of North America. And it turned out to be a 150-person organization that I had to run. And so, again, I have to be willing to leave Google to go and take on another opportunity with more responsibility. And it's funny if sometimes when I give talks, people will ask me, well, why did you leave Google? And I usually take that as a sign of I made a bad decision. I actually view it as one of the best decisions was to leave, and I wish I had left 5 years earlier.
So let's dive into that. What was it? What is it about that 5-year time frame? Why do you wish you'd left earlier? Do you felt like your skills were atrophying in some way?
I think there was a moment of not progressing and stopping. Just the learning stopped. Now, there were always, there's always different teams that I could go to, right, within Google. But at the end of the day, I wanted to have a different experience. And I think if you stay at an organization, and there's nothing, so by the way, when I say this, I don't think there's anything wrong if people stay at companies for 15 or 20 years. I have friends that are still at Google. I think the challenge with it is if you are working at a company like Google for that long, the only thing you ever really know is that is probably going to work out. And you always have this crutch to fall back on. You have a tremendous amount of resources. You have an exponential amount of brand recognition. And in the startup world, that's not the case. And I think you get humbled when you leave Google. And I think that was a really valuable experience to go through both at AdRoll, both at running a startup at TalkIQ and here at Dialpad as we continue to brand ourselves and get more exposure in a really large opportunity and market.
When you were at AdRoll, and to your point, you followed your boss, you're running a 150-person organization. What did you learn having that much responsibility for that large a team? What are the key lessons? Because obviously there's a lot of folks listening that are individual contributors, a lot of managers that are running teams of 7 to 10 people. But there's a difference of requirements when it comes to managing a global team of 150. What are the key things that you learned, the key lessons that you gleaned?
Yeah, I think that the two key lessons. One is having a very clear direction and focus for the organization, and I think that's true for CEOs, right? If you've got to provide that clear direction and focus for people. And then the second is, I think the most critical people. So I think there's two super critical roles in any organization. Number one is the CEO, and that CEO has to provide that focus and direction. And then number two is the frontline manager. And I think if you don't have strong frontline management, if those managers are not literally coaching every day and being focused on how to help their team best execute, in no matter what they're doing, whether it's selling, whether it's support, whether it's marketing, you name it, I do believe that the organization or the business is not going to be that successful. And I think that the middle, I hate to say like middle management or frontline managers are underappreciated, and again, probably the most critical to any organization. And so finding really strong leadership on that front, again, comes back to hiring.
Is there a process or tools or resources you invest in to develop great frontline managers?
Yeah, I think like one is you as an individual, right? If you're managing those people, is building that relationship and trust, and again, providing them with a clear expectation of, when we go into one-on-ones, what do we want to talk about? And that starts with, when I go into one-on-ones, I want to talk about performance of the business, and I don't need somebody to report out, right? We've got reporting. You can send me a report ahead of time, but a lot of it is coaching people how to be proactive. And I think anytime I think I'm doing a bad job at work, it is because I am constantly reacting to things. And the times that I feel most happy or I feel that I'm doing a good job happens to be when I'm in the mindset of, I'm being proactive, that I'm anticipating the change, I'm anticipating the innovation that we need to do, I'm anticipating the problems and getting ahead of them. And I think coaching people around that is, how do you get people to start thinking proactively about managing their team or managing the organization, and being thoughtful about what to focus on.
Any lessons or key mistakes that you see first-time frontline managers make that you think that they should avoid?
I think the most common one, and what happened just from personal experiences, I think the first time I got into management, I was suddenly managing my peers on the same team. So I went from an inside sales rep to actually managing that team and then being responsible for their performance. And I think, the trap that got me was, hey, I wanted to be the likable manager, which I think, everyone at work wants to be likable. But I now look back and I'm like, hey, being likable doesn't really matter as long as people respect you. And so I'd much rather people respect me for the decisions that I have to make. Sometimes they're hard decisions, and understand them, as opposed to always being, that's the fun manager that, you want to go grab a beer with, or whatever it might be. And I think that's just a common trap is people focus on the likability piece and realize that, look, you're going to be likable if you are transparent and honest with people. And if you demonstrate that sometimes you're going to have to make hard decisions and you help them understand the why, they will respect you for that. And that respect will actually make you likable.
That makes a lot of sense. I agree with that. So how long were you at AdRoll for?
I was there for 4.5 years.
And then did you go straight from there to become CEO of TalkIQ?
I did, which is kind of a crazy jump and leap. It's funny to tell a story. So I always wanted to be a CEO and run a startup. And so my dad was a CEO of a pharmaceutical company. And so for me, when I left AdRoll, I'd been in sales for 14, I'm trying to do the math in my head, kind of like 14 years. I didn't want to do any more ad tech. I'd been in ad tech for a number of times. And I was really just an opportunity in my life to say, look, I can either go do another VP of sales or do a CRO gig. And I had offers for that, or I can actually go take a right-hand turn at the pass and join a VC as an entrepreneur in residence. And they had set me up with TalkIQ to be a first-time CEO. And if you want to be a CEO, I think nobody was going to hire me as the CEO of a public company. Nobody was going to hire me to be a first-time CEO of even a reasonably large startup. And so it really was joining a small team of very technical founders that were looking for somebody with more go-to-market and sales and business experience to help round out that team. And so I had joined Jim and Etienne at TalkIQ, and both of them are exceptional engineers and technical founders. And Neither of them at the time wanted to be CEO and run the business. And so they had gone through a recruiting process and fortunately settled on me. So I'm thrilled with that.
When was that?
Ooh, that was in 2014.
Oh, wow. So you were CEO for a while.
Yeah, actually 2016. I should have my dates straight. So I was CEO for 18 months. I took us through our series. We did immediately when I joined, I had to kick off fundraisings. We did our Series A, our series that we did a $14 million round that was led by Salesforce Ventures and Scale Ventures. And then about 18 months later, we had an acquisition offer from Dialpad and then went through an acquisition. So it's kind of a crazy 18 months crash course of being a first-time CEO, of learning how to fundraise and then going through an acquisition and how do you coach people through that and so forth. So I'm super.
What was the biggest surprise? What was it that when you finally got into the job you had not expected or had not appreciated as fully?
Which job? The CEO job or?
The CEO job, yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, so that process was interesting because what happens is, one of the things that I learned is when people join an early stage company, some of those individuals would like to either go down with the ship if it doesn't work out as a startup, or they want to be kind of king of the hill and they want to make it on their own accord, right? And so it was interesting when we had the acquisition offer, Jim Etty and I debated it. We debated it with the board. We had 18 million in the bank and roughly 20 employees. We had plenty of runway and time to go and do things ourselves. And when we positioned it to the team, I was thrilled with the offer. I thought it was a generous offer and it was great. And I remember initially positioning it as, look, this is the best thing for everybody. This is awesome. And what became apparent in conversations with the team is there were the people that were like, hey, you know what? I'm not sure that I'm thrilled about it. And you suddenly realize that the people that again, join some of those really early stage startups that are, pre-series A or seed, really want to do it themselves. And again, that was a perspective that I hadn't thought about and didn't know until going through that process.
That is interesting and surprising. Did Dialpad inbound you, or had you been sort of running some kind of outbound process in terms of the just receiving the offer or the initial interest?
Yeah, so I think, so the way I've always talked about this, or just in general, is good businesses are bought and bad businesses are sold. Much like anything. I think if you're out there selling, you're trying to pitch yourself to get acquired, you lose a lot of leverage. I don't think that necessarily means things are going well. That's my personal take. I'm probably wrong on that as well. For us, what happened was, so we were building, at TalkIQ, we were building almost 3 startups in one. We were building our own sales dialer and our own telephony stack. We were doing all of our own speech recognition, which is how do I take text, transcribe it to audio? And then we were doing all of our own NLP, which is natural language processing, to say, once I have a conversation in text format, can identify things that are happening in it, things like sentiment or action items, you name it. So one of our challenges was actually figuring out how to get on call paths. People make calls in all sorts of different ways. They're on Dialpad and Zoom and Vonage and Ring Central and Cisco, you name it. And so I had actually worked with one of the co-founders at Dialpad, Brian Peterson. We call him Petey. He was the first engineer that I sat next to at Google. So Google at the time was just a couple hundred people. I was in sales and he was in engineering. We literally just sat next to each other and he was building tools for us. And so I called Petey and I said, hey, look, you run a business telephony company, or you helped found it. We're trying to figure out how to get on call paths. And if you can do that, I think there's a lot of added value and benefits that we can do in terms of just go to market and kind of selling a software bundle. Craig, the CEO, and Vincent, who's the chief product officer, got really excited about it. And so we signed a partnership. And then that partnership we ran for 3 months. And as people kind of learned more about the software bundle and got excited, the board of Dialpad essentially said, you should go and buy these guys because it can be a differentiator and really interesting for you. And that board member happened to be Mark Andreessen. So,
well, that's cool.
Yeah, which is where you have all these kind of cool, unique stories. So then you get into like, well, how does an acquisition conversation start? And Craig, again, who's the CEO of Dialpad, for if people aren't following my storytelling, Craig calls me and says, hey, do you want to catch up and grab a beer? And I'm like, sure, I'm downtown, and they're downtown in San Francisco in Financial District. And so Craig and I actually grab a beer, and he literally just started the conversation, and we're super close, was, hey, have you ever thought of selling the business? And my immediate reaction was, no. And then you get into the conversation of kind of what he's thinking about and how to make it work. But it's always interesting because I never knew, what that conversation would ever be like when it popped up. And again, it's funny to kind of think like, oh, it just happened over beers and we started talking about things.
Did you feel pressure when someone asked that question? Have you ever thought of selling the business, to your point about good companies are bought and bad companies are sold? Did you feel pressure to act coy as opposed to, because I'm sure that you, as a CEO of a startup, that you had thought about that at some point in your life, but did you feel this pressure of saying, oh, of course not, this is something I want to do for, the next 50 years if possible?
Yeah. So then it gets into, I use terrible analogies. My friends at work are used to them at this point, but it all becomes high stakes poker. But here's my take. And it gets back to transparency and so forth. And look, like the second you get the acquisition offer, yes, you kind of like, you want to be coy, you want to be thoughtful about it. And they're like, hey, look, like I have to go talk with Etienne and Jim, who are the co-founders. And I got to talk to the team because that's really important to them as well. You got to talk. There's all these people that you have to talk to. Every one of those people also has an opinion. Some of it is, how do I maximize value? Some of it is, hey, is this a good long-term, whatever it might be. My guidance on that stuff is people shouldn't overthink it. And I think they should. I think if you try to play a game with it, you can really miss out. And I had seen that played out in other experiences of times where I think greed isn't like the right word, but I think people are trying to maximize the outcome too much and then they get burned. And so for me, again, could we have pushed the offer? We thought the offer was generous. The board liked the offer. We had to have some other conversations. We didn't shop the offer. But there are always those debates of like, should you ask for more? And I think when you get into that, look, if somebody wants, it's kind of like dating, which again, bad analogy, but if somebody wants to spend their time with you and it's a reasonable offer, maybe you should take it as opposed to pushing things, because I think that's where things really start to break down in negotiations for anything, is when people are trying to maximize a little bit too much and not trying to make it work for everybody.
I think that your decision not to shop the offer is fascinating. That must have been a debate at the board level, only because the natural thing when somebody says, here's what we want to pay for your business, is let's go validate that that's the right price with the market. But to your point, your perspective was it was fair. It felt generous. It felt like good partnership. So let's not look a gift horse in the mouth, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think it also, the other pieces to that, and I won't say other company names here, but there were places Jim and I, and we had, here's how the conversation played out on the board, because one of our board members said, well, what about calling X, Y, and Z? And me, Jim, and Etienne looked all at each other at the company listed and laughed and literally said, none of us will ever work there. Like, we will not go and work there. And so it comes down to Dialpad for us was, look, we were getting acquired by a team we knew. Our engineers through that partnership were on site on a weekly basis. We liked the values. We shared similar values. We shared a similar outlook of the world in terms of the business opportunity. And we knew that our product was going to become the number one focus of what the future of Dialpad looked like. And I think going back to startups, people don't want to just build things and then have them see them, you get acquired and then the product gets shut down. I think people get really bummed out about that stuff. And so, sure, we could have shopped the offer to X, Y, and Z company and had a conversation, but showing up in an office park in San Jose to me isn't the most exciting place in the world. And, to me, it's not all about the financial outcome. And again, people have different perspectives of that. For me, again, it goes back to there was a lot of alignment on the values and the outlook, and everybody of the team converting as a full-time employee, inclusive of our contractors. That was something that was also important to me. Was we had 10 contractors and I wanted to have all of them convert to full-time employees, and we got that. And again, I wouldn't change that decision at all. I think it was the right decision at the time, and I think pretty much everyone benefited greatly from it.
Awesome. It's good perspective. So finally, we get to the part of the conversation to talk about Dialpad and to talk about some of the perspectives that you have on the future of sales, which I think are really interesting. There's a lot of conversation right now about artificial intelligence and the role of AI, particularly in sales. And you obviously, first of all, you were running a company that was focused on using NLP and other AI technologies to derive insights, but How do you see AI integrating with the modern sales process? And what do you think the biggest changes are going to be that salespeople have to make as a consequence of using artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so I'm in the belief of, people are not going to lose their jobs because of AI. I think we are many years away from any of that happening. I think AI, and when we talk about AI, specifically speech recognition and NLP, are really there to augment experiences for people and bubble up insights to say, look, these people expressed a higher purchase intent. You should prioritize giving them a call back. And these are things that you should focus on, and then guiding them through those conversations. So I think it's less about do the processes change? Probably not. I don't think, in my perspective, greatly. Sales has been around as long as we have humans have been around. I don't think a lot of it changes. We just kind of rebranded and talk about different formulas for it. But I think at the end of the day, what's going to change are the insights and the data that people have. And I think less data entry, which is what people get really frustrated with as well.
So what's the best way that reps can leverage AI on the phone to be better salespeople, or to just be better?
Yeah, so I think things that we're focused on is, so one is data entry. So I think when you've got speech recognition and NLP, which is how do I actually capture and understand any conversation that I want to capture and have a record of. And I talk about voice as essentially the last offline data set, not just for sales reps, but for businesses. So these conversations happen every day. They're lost in the ether. We take bad notes. And so one could argue that incomplete data is saved to the CRM. And so now you have technologies that can ensure not only 100% coverage of that data, but also a way to search and explore and learn from that data. And again, I think that then changes the outlook, not just for sales reps on how do I prioritize my day, and then how can I use those technologies to guide me through a conversation. We do real-time speech recognition and NLP that provides suggested answers to people. So for example, somebody may ask one of our new reps a pricing question, and our brand new rep may not know pricing on our enterprise SKU. And we provide them with that information literally with milliseconds of delay. So they see it in pretty much real time. And again, that augments the experience for somebody, that they suddenly don't have to say, I don't know, let me get back to you. They can have a much more positive experience and provide them with some reassurance and confidence very early on in their interaction with customers. So I think that's the way that people can leverage these technologies and will leverage these technologies, which provide value and differentiation in a market for us.
My holy grail has always been, or my El Dorado or whatever, my lost city of gold, is that the AI and, obviously the voice to text transcription, but then the analysis that happens on top of it can replace the act of creating opportunities and sales stages in a CRM. And that essentially, not only do you not have to take notes, but the computer can tell you these are the people that are most likely to buy. These are the people that are in the middle of the funnel. And these are the next actions that we recommend as a course of all of that, which in some way obviates the need for create opportunity, enter notes, move opportunity from stage 1 to stage 2. Is that a realistic future, or am I getting it over my skis, so to speak?
No, I think that's a realistic future. I think we discussed it. I was meeting with an investor yesterday that was talking just about this, that I think anybody in the space, so, Gong, Chorus, Exec Vision, and us at TalkIQ, we all had that same view, which is, and that's the goal, the holy grail, as you said, which is, look, how does Salesforce ever lose? So Salesforce, I would argue, is a fantastic company, but they're a reactionary company, right? You and I have a conversation, I then go to Salesforce and I type in information to save. Now, if I can be the telephony company and I can understand that conversation in real time, I now sit in front of the CRM and I can actually go build my own CRM, right? Based on the data, the data that I'm hearing and learning and transcribing. So I do think that that's a massive opportunity. It is hard. So I think, again, it's great to say, hey, here's the holy grail of where we can get to. And I think many people have that same vision. It's really hard. It's going to take a lot of time. And I think, look, Salesforce and Microsoft with Dynamics, they all see it as well. And then you've got other, significantly large companies like Zoom that are really innovative. They also see it as well.
Yeah. And I think some of the issue is can you hold out long enough and not sell to Salesforce and become your own multi-billion-dollar company, or do you take the exit ramp at some point, which is, I think Salesforce acquired Relate IQ, and we're all excited for what that might be. I haven't heard much about it since then.
And so those are things, right? As as your time horizon goes on, I think it's the opportunity to start a business has arguably never been lower. The access to capital is insane right now, but building a large sustainable business, I would argue, is probably more difficult than ever. And I think you really get into looking at the big four of like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple, as they focus more on the enterprise opportunity. Suddenly things that you're doing, other people are doing. You can look at Outreach and Salesforce, great businesses. You can see Salesforce react to them with high velocity sales. And so you see it happen that these big, large companies are going to react to trends in the market. And then it comes down to how do you compete with them? How do you differentiate? Or to your point, when do you try to get out of the game?
Yeah, tricky question. Last question I have for you before we wind down for this episode is around specialization. You've said that you think specialization in sales is unnecessary. I'd like to unpack that a little bit. Tell us what you mean. Do you mean specialization by function, meaning BDRs versus AEs, or do you mean industry specialization? Walk us through your perspective there.
Yeah, so probably a controversial point of view. I think what's funny in seeing sales is a lot of sales organizations will follow each other on doing things. So I think like the rise of kind of BDR and SDR organizations over the past 10 years, I think of how do we get out of hiring in San Francisco for sales reps and put them in places like Austin and Salt Lake. Like everyone's doing the same thing. I think at times when I say specialization, it may not always be necessary. I do think it comes down to functions. And I think because you suddenly have handoff and handoff and handoff, you have an SDR, they're going to set an appointment and some information is going to get lost when they set an appointment for an AE. That AE is going to try to close the deal. The AE is going to then loop in a sales engineer because AEs, for some reason or not, can't always do their own demos. They're then going to loop in when the deal closes a customer success person. That customer success person is also going to loop in an account manager. And I'm not always, I've kind of been through that a number of times to say that I'm not always sold on the specializations of all of those teams being fundamentally necessary or driving more efficiency for an organization. And that might be a controversial point of view, but I think we are now kind of circling around talking about those things and kind of vetting it.
Yeah, I think it is somewhat controversial, but also a lot of people are talking about it because the SDR, AE, account manager, customer success, these delineations are typically for the benefit of the vendor, but not necessarily for the benefit of the buyer. And, there's a lot of conversation about can we orient around the buyer journey a little bit more versus how we think we should process things to make it easier for us.
Absolutely. And I think, what's interesting, again, when you work in a very early stage business, not to kind of keep harping on that experience, but I think it's a really valuable experience for people to go through. You suddenly realize how much you can accomplish with less software, less people, less specialization, and how quickly that team can actually accomplish things and move and be aligned. And obviously you pick up an incredible amount of challenges as things start to scale and get bigger.
Yeah. Dan, it's been great having you on the show. And we're sort of at the end of our time together. In this last little bit, what we like to do is pay it forward. We like to understand who influenced you, whether it's great books that you've read, great podcasts you've listened to, great board members that you've loved working with, maybe like Mark Andreessen. But who are, if you want to leave a breadcrumb trail for us to follow to figure out who your influences are, who would you point us to?
Yeah, so I think it depends. Like investors that I follow and think incredibly highly of, Wesley Chan at Felicis and Aiden at Felicis, Rory O'Driscoll at Scale have been fantastic and super insightful and have helped me anytime I've ran into a problem and needed help, are always there. Founders that I look up to that I think are great, Greg Johnson, he's at a company, I started a company called Invoca, and then Andrew Dudums, who founded Hims and Hers.
Fantastic. Dan, if folks are listening and they want to reach out to you and are interested in learning more about Dialpad, is that okay with you? And do you have a preferred method of communication that you'd like people to reach out to?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. please don't send me SDR emails making bets with me, trying to get you to respond. If you are trying to sell me something, write literally a 2-sentence email, and I'm more likely to respond.
Fantastic. Dan, thanks so much for being on the show, and we'll talk to you on Friday for Friday Fundamentals.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey everybody, Sam Jacobs at Sam's Corner. Another good interview with Dan O'Connell. I think there's a lot of really interesting lessons to take from Dan. One of them is just a little bit of humility. You can hear Dan's had a tremendous amount of success, and he takes it all with a grain of salt, so to speak. And he also is really, really focused on human relationships. One of the things he talked about was just developing and building great relationships at any organization that you work with, so that once you have those relationships, you can work with people that you know over time. And I think that that's what enabled him to move from Google to, the rest of his roles up through a CEO and president role at TalkIQ. He mentioned the story that led to his tenure there. And ultimately, through the acquisition of Dialpad, all of that was about human relationships, nurturing human relationships and ensuring that you're supportive and working with folks in a positive way. So I think that that's part of what's really interesting. I think also just making sure that you're focused on communicating effectively upwards and downwards and sideways across the organization, and really not obsessing about structure, not obsessing about the technically formal way to do things, but also just focusing on the human touch of leadership and making sure that people understand that you care about them, that you are there for them, and that you can help them grow over the course of their careers. And if you can do that, then you'll end up being a really, really good leader. So I also think, by the way, it bears stating that part of what really enabled Dan's success is working at fantastic companies. A lot of things are easier if you're selling AdWords. And so if you can, especially early in your career, the reason that picking great companies is sometimes more important early in your career is because it gives you great success before you need to trade success for title and for compensation. Sometimes you might not want to go work for the future Google or the future Slack, because at that point in your career, if it's 15 years in, you need a VP title or you need a C-level title, and maybe that's not available to you at those very large organizations. But if you can join a Google, if you can join a Slack early on and then just ride that wave, or a HubSpot, and one of our guests, Mary Rogel, is going to talk about her experience at HubSpot, I think that can be really, really powerful. So those are some of my takeaways. I think it's just a great story to hear about the success that Dialpad is having, particularly with their acquisition of TalkIQ. So hope you enjoyed the show. Before we go, we want to thank our sponsors. The first is DocuSign. Execute contracts and get to revenue faster with DocuSign, used by employees at 90% of the Fortune 500. Learn more at go.docusign.com/saleshacker. Second sponsor is, of course, Outreach, the leading sales engagement platform. If you want to reach out to me, you can. It's linkedin.com/the word in, and then /Sam F. Jacobs. Talk to you next time. Thanks for listening.